year to retire at the ripe old age of 65. Sydney's transport authorities thought they'd retired Albert back in 1968, but a group of young adventurers took Albert on the overland trail to London via India, Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran. He shuttled back and forth on the hippie trail till the mid-70s when things went wrong in Iran. Now being restored with fresh bunks and I guess an MP3 player to replace the cassette deck, he'll follow the Silk Road home from the UK later this year. David Griffiths is part of the project. He bought a Sydney double-decker in 1968. He's had his ever since. David, first of all, this sounds like one of those once-in-a-lifetime adventures. Where did the idea come from? When did you hit the point where you said, yes, we're actually going to do this?
It was Andy Stewart, an old friend of mine who actually owns the bus, and I've known Andy for many years because we are fellow owners of former Sydney Albion double-decker buses. The two are identical. And Andy was in Australia as a young Englishman on a working holiday in 1968, and it was the time of the London-Sydney Marathon, I understand, the car trip, and a friend of his was going to go back to England as part of that. Andy didn't want to, so Andy bought himself an Albion double-decker bus from the New South Wales Department of Government Transport, whose workshops were at the suburb of Chullora, and they had the bus withdrawn because it had had a rear end impact, and it was already 20 years old, and they were selling them off, and they wanted $800 for this one. And Andy said, what about 200? And they said, oh, well, 400 then. And he proceeded to set it up as a mobile home.
That's a remarkable piece of history, that there was a day when you could negotiate with government bureaucracy. My, oh my, how times change.
Well, yes. Well, at the same time, I was getting misty-eyed about having an Albion double-decker because I grew up with them. They ran to the northern beaches, mainly in Sydney, because they were strong and they could climb the steep hills that were involved in those runs. And they were simple and rugged, unlike some of the other buses. And I was actually looking to buy one myself, so I knew the procedure. You didn't buy them, you tendered for them, and they would suggest a tender price. And yes, it was all remarkably unbureaucratic.
Well, tell us a bit about Albert itself and how it is that it ended up in London and now is going to come home. I have a bit of a familiarity with these in that a radio station for which I worked in North Queensland had a Sydney double-decker bus. I'm fairly sure it's the same sort of model you're talking about. But how is it that Albert found his way all the way to London, and what's been happening to him since Andy took him home?
Well, a great deal. Andy used the bus as a means of getting back to Britain, and to defray costs, he invited other travellers to join him. So a crew of, I think it was 12 or 13 people signed up to go back to Britain. So they drove to Perth, crossed the Nullarbor, shipped the bus to Calcutta, and then drove overland the whole way through Afghanistan, which you could do then, and then Iran, Turkey, Europe, London. And there's a photo on the blog showing the arrival at Victoria Coach Station in 1968, and a London transport official looking interested, and all the young Australian travellers. Oh no, they weren't all Australian, they were a mix of Brits and Australians, Brits going home and Australians going to Britain. And that led on to saying, right, well, we've got this far, let's go back again. So he did. He went back to Australia from Britain, returned to Britain, came back to Australia, and the tricky part was the shipping, because Fremantle to Calcutta is expensive, so he decided to curtail the trips at Calcutta, and then did another 13 return trips from London to Calcutta. She advertised that it was the world's longest bus service, and it ran to a timetable. But then in 1976, after this had been going on for 8 years, the revolution in Iran came about, and that put a stop to things because the choice was to go through China, which was impossible, and so the bus was stuck in England, and Andy left it with a friend in Essex and turned to other pursuits which involved coming back to Australia and setting up as a travel agent in London.
Well, and clearly that's one of those circumstances where one thing leads to another. All these years on then, what have been the challenges in making the journey this time? Afghanistan theoretically open, I suppose, but is the plan that you will take the original route?
No, that Afghanistan is the key point to that. It's most unsafe, so, and Iran is still not good, so Andy's created a route that will run essentially along the old Silk Route from Asia. So it'll be Turkey. I might have missed out a country or two here, so my apologies to that country. Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and then Western China via Urumqi, and then to Shanghai, and then by ship to Fremantle. There have been plenty of ship departures from Shanghai to Australia.
It's a remarkable journey, and I think a remarkable way in which you can tie back to a time in your life and say, well, you know, we're older but bolder and still prepared to take on a great adventure. What would you list as, say, the two great challenges when the two of you started to cook this up and thought, could we do it again? What would be the two big things that you thought, these are hurdles we really have to overcome?
Well, one primarily was the restoration, because when Andy recovered the bus, it had had a bit of a drubbing because the friend in Essex had passed it on to a pair of hippies who set up camp in Chepstow in South Wales, and they changed the bus a bit and it had been allowed to run down badly. And then Andy tried to get it back, but a rival bus enthusiast blocked him, gazumped him on it. But then that led on, well, that was challenge one. Challenge two was to restore it because it had been badly run down, hadn't run for years, the body was in bad shape and the interior had been mucked around, so he's at this moment restoring it. The engine has been rebuilt, the driveline, gearbox, transmission all set up, and now he's on to the interior fit out. There'll be new bunks upstairs, 6 double bunks to accommodate 12 people, and we have 7 signed up for the whole journey out of the hope for 12, but there's a lot of other people who would like to do just one stage. You can do it from London to Istanbul, or Istanbul to Almaty, which is in to Shanghai, or Perth to Sydney. And some people have signed up for one or other of those stages.
As the two I see on this mission, what is the thing that you're looking forward to most? If you can imagine yourself behind the wheel, what's the stage of the journey that you're really tickled pink about?
Well, as I said, one stage, the sound of the Albion bus is special, and that's why I bought one, and it's peculiar, but around the world there are a lot of people who are just mesmerised by the sound of these things because of the note that comes from the gearbox. It all sounds rather silly, but there are some quite intelligent people who are very taken by it. Keeping the bus going will be a challenge, but I've had a lot of experience because I've got an identical bus. Andy has enormous experience because he's done the trip 15 times and he has every nut, bolt and rivet in the bus. And we have others on board. We have a nurse, we have a former PA to a big company. We have a young Scotsman who's a bus driver, so he'll be helping. Everyone has to cook, that's part of the deal. And we have 3 fairly strong bus people and a good mix of sexes. It's at least 50% women and men.
Sounds like one of the great adventures of a lifetime, and we'll put the details on the website and so forth for people who do want to get in touch. The simplest way for them to contact you is via the web?
Most certainly. Andy's, if you just Google Highroad for Oz, Highroad FOROZ, that will take you straight to the website, and it should also show up the web log, which is a log of the progress of the vehicle's progress from 1968 onwards, really.
Well, David, I've got to say I'm about to go and check out my long service leave entitlements, and I shall be in touch. Thank you very much for making time for us today.
We hope a lot of other people might be in touch too, and of course if there's any excited sponsors out there, we're certainly looking for money to help with the shipping costs from Shanghai to Perth.
Thank you very much indeed, David.
Thank you, Phil.
The